Well, the dawn of South Africa's democracy in 1994 presented our country with an opportunity to establish an efficient justice and judicial system that would be accessible to all. With new legislations and rule of law in accordance with the Constitution, came with it achievements as well as challenges. This including high-profile court cases that changed the face of the justice system and how South Africans viewed the ability of the law to protect them. As we mark 30 years of our country's democracy this year, we take a look at the different milestones that have shaped who we are as a nation. This is part of Morning Live's Democracy series going forward. Today, we focus on some of the landmark court cases that not only shocked us and the world, but also tell South Africa's story. To discuss this, we are joined by Ulrich Roux. He's a legal expert from Ulrich Roux and Associates, and Mpumelelo Zikalala, legal practitioner at Zikalala Attorneys. Gentlemen, pleasure to have you. Thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Good morning to you.
Ulrich, let me begin with you. So the year 1994, it presented the country with laws that promised equality and access to the justice system for all South Africans. Let's ask the question, have we done that? Has this been achieved?
Yes, well, remember that in 1994, South Africa, for the first time, promulgated our constitution, which is seen as our apex law in the country. And essentially, it replaced many laws which were known at that time as apartheid laws or Bantu laws. And the constitution made it clear that we are a country that was going to be governed by one act, the Constitution, and that any laws that were in contravention of the Constitution were found to be unlawful. It also saw the introduction of our Constitutional Court, the apex court in South Africa, and certainly it created a legal and a justice system that provided access to everyone. Everyone was seen to be equal in terms of the Constitution, and everyone enjoyed equal rights in terms of the Constitution. Certainly this was a vast improvement on our previous justice system, where there was severe discrimination towards certain members of our society based on race and ethnicity and their skin color and their religious beliefs. The Constitution replaced all of that and made everyone equal before the law. We saw very important laws being introduced, such as everyone has access to legal representation. Everyone has access to freedom or is entitled to freedom. Everyone is entitled to freedom of speech. Everyone is entitled to privacy. All of those very important laws, which certainly paved the way for everyone to be seen as equal members of our society, specifically when it comes to our judicial system and access to that judicial system.
Yeah.
So our constitution in today's day and age is seen as one of the strongest constitutions in the world. It is still being applied across our legal systems and across our courts in our country. And certainly it is something that South Africa as a society must be very proud of. And in my view, it must be protected at all costs.
Indeed. Mpumelelo, I'm going to ask you the same question. Have we achieved it? Has this equality and access to justice system for all been achieved?
Well, I'll say the foundation phase of the framework has been achieved. However, in order for it to be effective, I think we've found ourselves a bit lacking on that particular aspect. Yes, we may have the Constitution, we may have the courts, but if we don't have adequate access to the courts, then it defeats the purpose. Now, if we're not going to have any practical solutions that says a person who stays Malaka or even in Pietermaritzburg will go into the court and get immediate relief, that's where we're going to find ourselves short. Now, if there are certain instances of saying I can't even access the good laws that my and colleague has spoken about, then it defeats the purpose. But there's also a second part of it that calls for the transformation of the economic transformation of the legal sector, in which one would say, if you look at any courtroom today, are you going to find a true representation of the South African demographics? If you go to government, which is the biggest buyer of legal services, are you going to find the demographics, or is it still skewed in a certain particular manner? So it's certainly one of the things in which, even those that not deal directly with what the court would do. However, the foundations of our constitution, what was envisioned when they drafted the constitution and certain provisions dealing with the judiciary, I think they must have said, we want to make sure that we also bring in the question of equality, also bring in the question of access. It's just that the practical solutions or the practical ways of doing that have been on the slow side.
Yeah, I want to quiz a little bit, Ulrich. You did say that, you know, one of the highlights, of course, is the right to effective legal representation. Obviously, you know, this is something that is in the Constitution, it is written there. But can one say that the kind of representation that is offered to people, has it improved over the years? Are you feeling that people are getting, because many say, you know, money buys you a good lawyer, but if you don't have a good lawyer, I'm not sure you're going to win that case.
Yes, certainly. I think this is a subject for debate across the world. You know, we have the Legal Aid Society in South Africa, which essentially provides legal representation to a person who cannot afford their own private legal representation. And certainly, if someone is you know, in a better financial position, then most likely they would be able to afford better legal representation or the top legal representation in our country. But legal aid does provide that service that where previously people, if they could not afford an attorney, then they would have to represent themselves. They now do have a qualified attorney, a person with experience who does, you know, will be able to represent them. Of course, the quality of the representation, you know, can be brought into scrutiny, and one can look at specific individuals. But in my firm, you know, I have one of my senior associates at my firm worked for Legal Aid South Africa for 10 years. He built up a vast amount of experience in our criminal courts in South Africa, and it stands him in very good stead now, and he's an excellent attorney. So certainly the entire system is going to have teething problems, and one can debate until the cows come home whether a legal aid attorney is more skilled or more experienced than an attorney in private practice. But the important thing is that a person who previously could not afford an attorney would now be in a position to be represented. And of course, that person also plays a big part in his own case. You know, how involved is that person? You know, how is he assisting his own attorney in presenting as strong a possible case, you know, given the circumstances that prevail in his or her case. But, you know, I do think that the system can improve in certain ways, but again, I emphasize that it is there. And as my colleague said as well, you know, it also depends on funding coming from government, on resources available, on all of those things. So it's you know, our justice system cannot be seen to stand alone at all times. It is intricately involved in the governing of our country, and whether an institution like Legal Aid South Africa is given the best resources in order to represent people and in order for people's constitutional rights to be enforced, and that, of course, the right to legal representation. You know, it's an occurrence across the entire globe that, you know, if you are seen as to be a more wealthier person than an average member of society, then theoretically you would be able to afford the best attorney. But that goes across all boards. You know, you would be able also to afford the best doctor or the best architect or the best engineers. And that is you know, it's a factor of society, and I don't think that the blame for poor legal representation can be placed purely at the door of Legal Aid South Africa. I think they provide an essential service and a service which, once again, is in line with our Constitution.
Yeah, all right. I want to, I don't want to run out of time, so I want to get into discussing a couple of the biggest cases that we have seen happen over the last 30 years and how they changed. And Mpumelelo, I'm going to come to you. And I mean, if there's anything you feel you want to add in terms of, you know, we've heard that we've got the best constitution in the world compared to our other countries, also legal aid, things like that. But let's delve a little bit more into some of the cases. And if we take a look back, I suppose jump to mind would be this case, the conviction of our former police commissioner, Jackie Selebi. That, of course, is one of those big moments in the history of South Africa. This was in 2010. It was one of the cases that brought to the fore the extent of corruption in the country. Perhaps you want to talk to that one, and highlighting this, would you say this is possibly one of the biggest cases that our justice system has seen in our 30 years of democracy?
Probably. I think within that case, our justice system was able to display that it is independent, it is strong. The strong and long arm of the law eventually will catch up with you, whether you are at the top brass within the South African law enforcement agencies. We are going to, or the system is going to catch up with you, and you will be convicted. So when it came to the independence of the judiciary, I think it displayed to say, yes, we can be able to get to wherever you are. But I think the one thing, though, that it didn't do was to deter certain other individuals. If you look at the year in which that conviction took place in 2010, and look at how many cases have followed up since then up until now, and look at the high extent in which people are then engaging in sort of corrupt activities, one would then say, where is the effectiveness of the courts? Are they really lenient, or are they being harsh? Which is a question. Is it a question of law enforcement agencies not doing their jobs adequately in terms of investigations, or is it the question of our courts being lenient in terms of the punishments which are going to be given? Are the punishments giving the type of deterrence which is required to then say to an official who's sitting in their office, I'm not going to engage in any corrupt activities because I fear going to jail for the rest of my life. I fear being taken away, or the good things that I've worked for being taken away. Maybe it's another thing that must be looked at. But in terms of the system working optimally, the system being able to deal with the responses or the corrupt activities that are there, I think we are slowly but surely getting there.
Yeah, slowly but surely it is. It's one of those cases that we really do need to look a little bit deeper into, and the issues of the drug money and Glenn Ogliotti and all of those things taking place in this particular case was one of the most interesting, and certainly bringing corruption into the light here. But it's not all been bad news for the legal and justice system, as some of the achievements also include the protection before the law to all citizens, regardless of sexual orientation, for example. I mean, the Constitutional Court protecting the rights of same-sex marriages. This was back in 2005. Ulrich?
Yes, indeed. And in that regard, South Africa can be seen to be a very progressive to have a very progressive justice system with same-sex marriages being regarded as being lawful since 2005, and that has obviously been implemented since then. It goes further to that, once again, that all individuals are seen to be equal before the law, regardless of your sexual orientation, and certainly, setting the tone for the rest of the world. We've now seen a number of other constitutions across the world adopting the same laws, and I think that South Africa can be very proud of that, and the example that we have set. Our justice system is of course under severe pressure. We do have a high crime rate. We cannot deny that when compared to other countries across the world. But the quality of your justice system and the quality of your laws is dependent on a number of things. It's dependent on the quality of judges in courts. It's dependent on the ability of courts to streamline the court's role and the number of cases that are heard in court on a daily basis. These are things that we do struggle with, but once again, South Africa has shown vast improvement in that regard, and I think one of the cornerstones of that is the fact that everyone is seen to be equal before the law. I think that the case that you mentioned earlier about Jackie Selebi is very important in this regard. Remember that he was our National Police Commissioner, and more than that, he was head of Interpol for 4 years. And when these corruption allegations were brought against him, he was successfully prosecuted, and he was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. He was, of course, released 2 years after starting to serve his sentence on medical parole, and then passed away as a result of those medical conditions a few years later. So that case confirmed that our system works, and that it doesn't matter who you are. You can be the head of the police and the head of Interpol for 4 years. If you are found guilty before our courts in this instance of corruption, you will face the might of the law, and you will be sentenced to prison just like any other member of society would. And that, I think, is something, once again, that we need to be proud of and that we need to work towards.
Indeed.
deterred future corruption from taking place? That is obviously a debate that that we can debate until the early hours of the morning.
And
but
we don't have time, unfortunately. Ulrich, I want to move on to other cases as well, because we've only got about 3 minutes left. So I want to quickly, Mpumelelo, get to you and ask you about another landmark case. And I'm going all the way back to 2002 now, because this one really does jump out for me as well, where the Minister of Health and others versus the Treatment Action Campaign and others, in which the Concord ruled that people living with HIV should have access to treatment. This was a massive case. I mean, if we think of the amount of people that were dying in South Africa during those years, the years of HIV and AIDS, that were not able to get this kind of treatment, this case for you?
Yeah, definitely. And it played a particular role in terms of saying our courts are going to be the oversight or the overlookers or play the big brother role in terms of saying, government, if you're not doing your job, we're going to force you to do that. And in this case, it was for the benefit of many other individuals. And also the fostering and maybe better understanding of what the Constitution is saying in terms of the rights that need to accrue to individuals and the implementation of those rights. Not only that, you then saw the issue of housing popping up. You then saw the issue of social grants popping up, in which our courts have constantly came to the defense of South Africans to say, we are going to protect your rights. We are not going to allow government, no matter how strong they are, to bulldoze you or to not give you whatever that is true to you. But another aspect that is linked to that is then says, how accessible are those particular tools so that you can be able to play within that particular judiciary? Do you have the money to play within that? We've spoken about the legal aid earlier. Then the question would be, what happens to the missing middle, the person that says, I may have a bit of money, but I may not qualify for legal aid, but the economic system deals me as such a huge blow that I cannot be able to afford to pay for legal fees. What then happens to making sure that whenever you take a matter to court, it is much, much easier. For example, you have Gauteng that has much better ways in which of filing a court. Come to KZN, they're doing it in a manner in which they did it when I was born in 1986. It's still physically where you have to go and file, you have to go and serve, and there's no electronic system that is there. So the gains may have been there, the cases may have been there, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be considered, even when it comes to traditional courts.
All right. I've got 2 more cases to talk to. I'm giving you each less than a minute on this one. Ulrich, I come to you. I mean, the country has seen an increase in gender-based violence over the years. It's been horrific. The cases that have truly shocked us in the world, including the story of baby Tepang, the murder of Uyunene Mkhochana, Chekhovate Pule, Annie Devani, stealing headlines all over the world. There were convictions, but they also showed the extent of how far the law could reach. Perhaps quickly talk about those particular cases, very quickly, Ulrich.
They have, certainly. I mean, baby Tepang's case was horrific, to say the least. A 1-year-old baby girl who was raped and sodomized. And I read an article this morning, and wonderful news that she's thriving now. She's doing very well at school. She's playing sports, and she really has, defied all odds to become so successful and put this behind her. But in that matter, the person convicted of a rape was sentenced to life imprisonment for rape, which was a first in South Africa and certainly a landmark case where previously, a person convicted of rape was not sentenced to such a harsh sentence. And definitely, paved the way for harsher sentence to be handed down in terms of gender-based violence and rape cases, etc. The Annie Devani case, of course, it was an international couple who came here on honeymoon, and the allegations were that her fiancé had organized a so-called hit on her life and had murdered her. That trial, he was firstly extradited to South Africa from the UK, and then that trial commenced in the Western Cape High Court, and he was acquitted on all charges, which, again, it showed that everyone is equal before the law, and although there was a strong assumption amongst society that he was responsible for her murder, that her hitmen in fact testified and turned 204 state witnesses and testified against him, the evidence was found to be so weak that he could not be convicted and that the state could not prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Okay.
So certainly very far-reaching cases. But I think just last, Domestic Violence Act and our Harassment Act, which also came in, into effect after the promulgation of the Constitution certainly protects, female members of our society and again develops our law in that regard.
Yeah. Ulrich, we've got to leave it there. We've got to go. I didn't even get to touch on probably one of the biggest and the one that really put us under the global spotlight, Oscar Pistorius, where suddenly our justice system was being broadcast live to the world and they could watch it in action. That was a massive one. Hopefully we can revisit a couple of other cases. Ulrich, thank you. Thank you very much. And Mpumelelo, Zikalala as well. Let's, of course, wrap that interview here, talking 30 years of our justice system. So